Good morning. We're at Blue Sky Vineyard in Union County, Illinois today, April 25th, 2020. And as you know from the previous video, we were concerned about injury from frost. And we're at an elevation here, probably around 560, 575 in elevation, might be slightly higher, on a hilltop. And what I wanted to show you here is on this particular shoot, which is one of the longer shoots that's out here, you can see right here along the margin, you see the black margin there? That, I think, here and here is incipient frost damage. The frost formed along the edge of that leaf, and the leaves were folded up at that time. They would have looked about like this or this at that time during the frost event, and frost formed on the tips of these margins here, and you can see evidence of that by the necrotic or dead tissue that's only on the margins of the leaf. If it'd been a little worse, and you may even see a little cupping on these leaves as they start to grow out, because there's no meristematic activity in the edges of that marginal leaf. That's going to be puckered, and then the leaf will continue to expand. The living cells will continue to expand. But the fortunate thing is the flower cluster looks very healthy. So this was the control in our experiment without sugar application. And then, and this is one example. We see, I would say, less than 5% showing this kind of injury. So we were just close to frost injury, but not quite there. And that was due to the elevation that we have here. Let's go over and look at the sugar-treated vignole and see how it compares. So we're now at the sugar treatment, and 5 pounds of sugar per acre. And what's really interesting is we see a touch of brown necrotic area on this one sector of the leaf, but these shoots are quite far out and you can see no damage. And what's really interesting is if we'll look over on this side, look at these. Those shoots were fully advanced and we see no marginal burn. And this would suggest that this was protected by the sugar. Okay, but obviously this test was not very conclusive, and the reason was the temperature on this hilltop did not quite get to that 27 to 29 degree temperature. But I'm telling you, I think this is a good indication, something that we should continue to follow, because we see no evidence of marginal leaf burn here. Okay, and as I look down the chute here, or down the cordon, as I look down the cane, you can see that all of these shoots are quite nice. Very little burn, and so this is something I think we should continue to look at. And why I think we should continue to look at it is because we'll show you in a little bit an example of a vineyard that is about 200 or 250 feet lower elevation than this vineyard, and we might find a little more damage there. Okay, we're at the Cab Franc block at Blue Sky, and what we see here is, first I want to call to your attention the long shoots that have grown out of these buds since the frost week. And you can see on these spurs we've got most of the buds have broken and growing, and you can see that there's very little evidence of marginal leaf burn. Fairly clean. We have a lot of pink pigment, and I believe that pink pigment is fairly intense right now because of the extremely cool temperatures. We've had temperatures, often daytime highs in the last week and 10 days of 55 or 60 degrees, and nighttime temperatures down in the 40s upper 40s to low 50s, and that's led to more anthocyanin accumulation in the shoot tips. But we're not seeing any evidence of frost damage here, but we do see that we were at risk much greater on the spur pruned cordon as compared to the cane pruned cordon. And the reason is, look how far these buds are advanced. On the day of the frost, these buds were advanced to the point that we had plenty of green tissue, and they were fully hydrated so that they would be easily killed by temperatures of 28 or 29 degrees Fahrenheit. If you look to the left here, on the cane, you can see a lot of these buds on the cane are still tight. This one's just cracked. These are hardy down into the low teens or even single digits on these buds. And so this is an example of where the cane pruning can give us a great advantage in limiting our injury from frost damage, because the buds on cane pruned vines tend to leaf out considerably later. I'd say at least 7 to 10 days in a cool spring, maybe 2 weeks this year, because of the slow development that we're seeing. And we can go on down the row here, and you can see that the cane just has most of the buds not yet beyond bud crack. And then right here we have spur pruned, and you can see that those buds are much further out. So this, in a frost season, this is something that we would see as a disadvantage with our spur pruning. This is the control treatment for our sugar experiment. So we didn't have any injury from frost, but let's just go over and look at the sugar treatment a couple rows over to the north here. Well, we're here at the sugar treated row in the Cab Franc, and you can see there's no real evidence of any kind of injury to the leaves. What I do see is I see effect of cold temperatures on these leaves. They're slightly chlorotic, and the new leaves are rose pink, fairly intense, and that's from the cool weather. But if you look at this, we're seeing the same phenology. We're seeing delayed development of the buds along the canes. And this is one of the. Now we're at this stage. That shoot could tolerate probably 28 degrees, 27 or 20. 28 is probably where I would say is probably the safe zone. And you see the rest of the buds haven't even cracked, or just barely cracked. Here's the bud scale cracked there on this one. Then we look at the spurs, and the spurs, just like on the control, the spurs have shoots that are much advanced, and those would have really been compromised had we had colder temperatures. We lucked out. And why did we luck out on this vineyard? We lucked out because in about 2000, so 20 years ago, the owner of this vineyard made the conscious decision to plant these vines on the top of a hilltop. And that provided good cold air drainage, and that's the best insurance against frost damage. If you look down, again, striking difference in the buds that are dormant to bud crack, as this one is, compared to the spur. The spurs, the buds are already out. We've got 3-inch shoots on these spurs. Cane has not really appreciably become susceptible to frost injury. Low winter temperatures in midwinter, maybe, but not in the frost season. I would expect a frost that we might encounter in the next week. This cane would be resistant to that frost, because the buds are very slow to develop on the cane.
Ready to start?
So now that we've looked at these differences in phenology between spur pruned and cane pruned, and we see on the ideal site we have no evidence of injury, we'd like to go look at a vineyard that's at a lower elevation. So let's go look at that. So we're at the Valvin Muscat block blue sky, and what's interesting is you can see some healthy leaves along here, but what's really interesting is that we start out here, the longest shoot, look at that shoot. If we zero in on this, what we're going to see is we're going to see necrotic tissue. You see this is no longer flexible, it's dead necrotic tissue. The clusters are dead. There will be no fruit here. That's a flower cluster there and a flower cluster here. So this shoot was hit by the frost, and that's typical of frost injury. Now on French hybrids like this Valvin Muscat, there's a chance for a secondary bud from the base of this shoot to emerge and grow a partial crop. If you look, this is an adjacent bud, probably just a slightly bit behind in development at the day of frost. You can see it got tinged with a little frost on the edge of the leaf like we saw in the Vigneault, but the flower clusters look healthy. Okay, so that's a very, very close call. Slightly delayed bud development than this one, and there is quite a bit of variation when we look at injury in the incipient stages, just at where injury starts, because each shoot has several different factors: water content, surface isonucleating bacteria, sites, etc., that could affect this. If we look on down the shoot, we can see another frosted shoot, and here's another really good example on down of another frosted shoot. Here's one that's going to have some cluster damage. The cluster does not look healthy to me. Leaf margins are totally toast. And here's another shoot that was damaged. And you look right on past another shoot that's very damaged here. And my guess is there could be some issues with that cluster, but certainly the leaf. Okay, so if we look down this row, about 10 shoots were frosted out of a total of about 20 to 30 shoots. So we've got some significant damage on this Valvin Muscat on this particular cordon. As we look down the cordon, we can walk on down the row here, and you can see some additional damage, especially here, here. Okay. So you might ask yourselves, we were at the Vigneault block, we walked by Chardonnay and Cab Franc, and we saw very little injury from frost damage at this particular vineyard. So the question is, why all of a sudden did we find damage from frost injury here at the Valvin Muscat block that's very, very close to the other three blocks I just mentioned? And one of the things to think about is how this lays. Notice the hill behind us, the Chambourcin block, has an elevation that's probably about 20 feet, 15 or 20 feet higher than where we are. And there's even behind the winery a little higher elevation. That air all drains this way. So this is the swale where that air drains, and this is where we had the coldest temperatures on this of all the vineyard property here at this particular site. Okay. So we walked down the hill just a little bit in the Valvin Muscat block, and you can see there's more extensive damage here, a little bit lower elevation. We had some shoots that escaped, but majority of shoots were toasted, and these will not have a crop. The leaves are horribly damaged. There's no photosynthesis going on in this leaf. The margins are already dead, and the flower clusters are brown, and I don't think there'll be any cap fall on this particular cluster. As you move on down, you can see on these little short weak shoots of these weak spurs, the weak spurs tend to bud out early, and this was the size of these shoots on the day of the frost, and they were killed. The reason they're not any bigger now is because they didn't grow, because they're dead. And we walk on down. Look. Got a little escape here. I'll point out a little bigger diameter spur, and this shoot was much smaller on the day of the frost, and it escaped the frost. These are shoots that were out. This is the length that they were during the frost, and you can see here we have about 17 out of 25 shoots killed by the frost at the lower elevation. And if you will have a look at the lay of the topography here, you can see that air was flowing. You can see that air was flowing down the hill from the higher spot in the Chambourcin block, past where we first did our film, down even lower, another probably 6 or 8 feet lower, and then the air, when it got to the end of the row, it pushed up against these cedars, and those cedars acted to suspend or slow the flow of air and created essentially an air dam right there. And so that air dam created a frost pocket here that allowed colder air to accumulate in this region, and that colder air caused the vast majority of these shoots to be killed. So this clearly demonstrates the advantage of site selection in your vineyard here in our frost-prone Midwest.